The transformative decade of the 1960s, which began with such optimism, would end with chaos. A series of events, within consecutive months of each other, would leave the country searching for answers. The first dramatic event happens on March 31st, 1968. President Lyndon Johnson goes on the air to inform the American people that he will not run for a second term as President of the United States.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Johnson will tell the American people that the reason why he is not running for another term as president is because he should focus all of his energy on ending the war in Vietnam, and campaigning for another term would serve as a distraction from that goal.
I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country.
Everyone had assumed that President Johnson would run for a second term in 1968, so his decision to step away from office created a void in the election and a huge gap in the Democratic Party. Who would take the lead of the Democratic Party and run for the White House? Into President Johnson's place stepped Vice President Hubert Humphrey. Humphrey ran as the favorite candidate of the party base and promised to continue the policies of Lyndon Johnson. But the radicals in the Democratic Party, like the New Left, would not support Humphrey. Feeling abandoned by the party leadership, they wanted someone who would revolutionize America. In steps Robert Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy had served as Attorney General under his brother and was then elected to a Senate seat from New York. He was very close to Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez, who were both radical leaders for change in the 1960s. Kennedy would run as a candidate to end the war and stood for social justice. This would make him a favorite of the New Left.
Cannot continue to deny and postpone the demands of our own people while spending billions in the name of freedom elsewhere around the globe.
Throughout the primary process, Robert Kennedy gained momentum and soon became the favorite to win the Democratic Party nomination. In the process, the fight between Humphrey and Kennedy split the party into two: the old guard, who supported Johnson and Humphrey's policies, and the new Democrats, who supported Bobby Kennedy. Meanwhile, the Republicans nominated Richard Nixon, former vice president and presidential candidate in 1960. Nixon tapped into the new conservative wave that rebelled against the changing times of the counterculture and New Left. They resisted the call for revolution and felt the country was headed dangerously close to a path that would lead to self-destruction. During the campaign, Nixon promised to speak for what he called the silent majority, or conservative Americans who quietly went about their business, opposed the radicalism of the New Left, and upheld traditional American values.
As we look at America, we see cities enveloped in smoke and flame. We hear sirens in the night. We see Americans dying on distant battlefields abroad. We see Americans hating each other, fighting each other, killing each other at home.
But just 4 days after Johnson's announcement, a tragedy strikes that will affect America forever. On April 4th of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee.
King was shot on the balcony of his hotel by James Earl Ray. He was in Memphis to march for rights for black sanitation workers. The night before, MLK had sensed his death was near, and he compared himself to Moses. He urged African Americans to move forward peacefully without him.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
Following his death, riots broke out in almost every major city as African Americans lashed out in anger.
Just 2 months later, another assassination will plunge America into dark times.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
On June 6, 1968, presidential candidate Robert Kennedy is assassinated in Los Angeles, California. Kennedy had just won the Democratic primary and had become the frontrunner in the 1968 presidential election. After addressing supporters in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel, Bobby Kennedy was shot in the hotel's kitchen by a Palestinian extremist named Suran Suran. As a Palestinian, Suran claimed he killed Kennedy because of Kennedy's support for Israel. The nation was in shock. How could this happen again to another Kennedy? And for New Left Democrats, who now could they vote for? With their candidate murdered, and no one to vote for that represented their stance, the New Left became angry, and the nation felt as though everything was about to become unhinged.
So in the summer of 1968, Democrats gather in Chicago to nominate Hubert Humphrey for president. Over 10,000 anti-war protesters show up to demonstrate against the party's war platform. The Chicago mayor orders police to crack down on the protesters. Television broadcasts show video of police beatings and protesters setting fires in the streets. Inside the convention, the party descends into chaos, and voters turn on the party. Voters were fed up with liberalism, and they wanted stability, and they decided to elect Republican Richard Nixon in 1968.
As the nation stumbled to the end of the decade, the radical liberalism of the late 60s had fallen out of favor, and American counterculture was facing its last gasp. One event would culminate the 1960s in an iconic moment in time. That event is Woodstock. In August 1969, the counterculture gathered on a New York farm for the Woodstock Music and Art Festival. For over 3 days, 400,000 people sat in the rain and mud. This peaceful and well-organized festival was the highlight of counterculture in the 1960s. Rock's biggest stars came out to play. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Joe Cocker, The Who, Carlos Santana, and Richie Havens were among the performers. Woodstock was a symbolic goodbye to a decade that changed America.